welcome to the video. My name is John, and this is the CS Joseph podcast. Some of you may know me. I recently was part in making the course with Chase, the Ego Hacking Your Fear course, and I also write blog posts for the articles. But if you're not familiar with me, I do some content here, and today we're going to make a video on Robert Greene. I recently wrote an article on Robert Greene and analyzing his octagram and talking about his type a little bit. Robert Greene has been one of the most important academics and writers that Chase has cited since Chase began his YouTube lectures 4 or 5 years ago. And I thought it was necessary and interesting to kind of dig into him more, especially because he doesn't have, specific content in this psychology. His content's more fundamental. So I wanted to spend some time and investigate him and understand why he's so important even in this space in understanding personality type. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about in this video was in the article, which I'll link above and below in the video. I didn't spend a lot of time proving that Robert Greene was an INFP following the traditional vectors of the type grid. Chase has already done that, beat that horse to the ground many times over the years. Instead, I wanted to spend the first portion of the article proving his type via cognitive origins. And I did this for the main reason that I think most people are still relatively uncomfortable relying on the cognitive origins for typing, relying just on the cognitive origins and on the tempo wheels for typing others. For example, Robert Greene, who is an INFP, his tempo wheel and his cognitive origin is authority, power and authority, expertise, knowledge. That's what these mind tempo philosophers are seeking most, the INFP and the ESTJ. And I think, there are certain times when you're going to type people or type famous people or authors or actors, and you really have to dig. You have to dig into their language. You have to analyze their language and really try and account for human nurture and also if they're playing a part when they're being interviewed, etc. But for Robert Greene and also for other people, sometimes their type or their origin is just handed to you on a silver platter. For example, his book, this one, the 48 Laws of Power, is the question that came to me when I was thinking about the article is what kind of person could really write this book and write a book entitled The 48 Laws of Power. It's sort of like he's handing us his cognitive origin on a platter here. And the fact is he is doing that. And he's surveying history for the rules that he observed people followed and leveraged to try and gain power for themselves, sometimes at the expense of others, oftentimes at the expense of others. And that was the main thing that drew me to analyzing him, because INFPs are affiliative, right? They're actually triple affiliative. 3 of the 4 sides of their mind is an affiliative type, the INFP ego, the ESTJ subconscious, and the ENFJ shadow. And for an affiliative type, especially a triple affiliative type, especially a power type who can often be kind of, an authority type, or oftentimes covert with the way they obtain their cognitive origin. For a type like that to write a book like this, and also his other work, which is also great, and we'll talk about that soon. But for a type to do that, for an INFP to write a book like this, exposing that to other people, is, in my opinion, really profound, because INFPs are so afraid of what people think of them. They're so afraid of losing reputation, right? And that's even one of the laws of power in the book is, basically guard your reputation at all costs for its everything, right? So for an INFP to do that, it requires not only an insane amount of humility, it requires an ability to steer into the truth. And we'll get into his octagram momentarily, but I wanted to frame this discussion about Robert Greene's type in this way, and talking about just how profound it is that someone of his type has done the work that he's done. And I talk a little bit in the article about how Robert Greene has been mistyped on the internet as an INTJ. I was looking up what the common perception of him was, and most everyone, all the sites I visited, most of the YouTubers I looked at, other Reddit posts, right? Most of them thought that he was an INTJ, and at first I was thinking, that's kind of crazy. That's really far off from an INFP, right? But then I thought about it more, and I thought about the perception of Robert Greene being this sort of independent thinker, right? And he certainly is independent in terms of he's not attached to an educational institution, he's not a professor, right? He's not any of those things. And if you think about INTJ versus INFP, the main point that stood out to me is if you're aware of Robert Greene's kind of method of research and how he writes his books, right? In his own words, he said he looks at the most powerful people from history and breaks them down, right? And gathers evidence from them, gathers their story, and then derives principles from them. He's insanely heavy on the research side, right? And that ability to research in a very wide variety and distill very efficiently and cohesively into these principles, anyone who's at least semi-familiar with the psychology can identify that as a high extroverted thinking function or a preference for extroverted thinking. And I think it's pretty obvious that Greene is also an abstract type. I mean, he's always talking about these concepts, these principles. Someone could maybe argue ISTJ with a well-developed ENFP subconscious. There's a possibility for an argument there, but most people would agree that he's an extroverted thinking user who is also abstract. And there's only two of those. It's the INTJ and it's the INFP. No one else is introverted and has a preference for abstraction and a preference for extroverted thinking than those two types. And how heavily Greene relies on his research really makes him seem like a high TE user, like a extrovert thinking hero or extrovert thinking parent. But one of the reasons for that is because of his Octagram development, right? And we'll post a picture of the INFP's Octagram in the video here. But you can see in the middle we have power and authority, right? And then we have credulity and manifestation. And these wheels correlate. These simple wheels correlate with the four sides of the mind completely. And for the INFP and the ESTJ, when they access their credulity, it means they are using their subconscious. And Robert Greene is developed in his ESTJ side. He's SD, right? And some people could argue about this, about whether he's UD or SD, whether he's leading with an ENFJ shadow and being this great teacher of others, right? And he is a teacher to some extent, but he's absolutely subconscious developed into his extroverted thinking aspirational. And one of the reasons why he's this way is because if you look at his work, he lets the facts speak for themselves, right? He doesn't make a judgment on the facts. He very rarely does. And this is one of the profound, in my opinion, this is the most profound thing about Robert Greene, being an INFP especially, right? That he takes these facts, does all this research, derives these principles of how people have used a law of power, a law of war, a strategy for mastery or success, right? And he grabs those, distills them, and then explains them, explains, we'll just say explains. He explains them to the audience in a way that's very factual, very down to earth, without making a moral judgment of them, right? And this is one of the things he receives a lot of criticism for, especially in this book, in the 40 Laws of Power. People have accused him of being, manipulative, deceptive, Machiavellian, amoral. I think some of those criticisms may be fair, especially the amoral criticism in terms of his approach to his work, and so much as he's not really making a moral judgment. But I think people fail to appreciate how difficult that is for an INFP, because what it requires is for them to let go of their hero function, let go of the pride of their hero function almost entirely. INFPs can be the most delusional of all the types, with TI demon and SE trickster, and they can just dwell in their FI heroes kind of glow of positivity and of the idealistic future that they dwell in, that they live in, basically, but not Greene, right? And the reason why Robert Greene is SDUF, as we talk about in the article, is because he prides himself as someone who can face reality. And so much of his work, in my opinion, and in his own words to some extent, is derived from the fruit of being able to face reality, right? In one of his talks that he gave at Yale, which is on his channel, and I linked it in the article and I quoted it a few times, he talked about these rude awakenings that he had leaving college and starting to go into the corporate world. And he talked about how he was just shocked. He was utterly shocked by the lack of kind of honesty, a lack of exposure, a lack of honesty about the power games that people played in the corporate world. And he used this word shock, and he says it other ways at other times where it was just this moment in time for him that he realized things were not as they seemed. And I talk about in the article that specifically for the SDUF type of all variants, the SDUF variant is really emerges from that rude awakening where, when your subconscious developed, you were enabled in your early environment. Doesn't necessarily mean you were happy in your early environment, but that your inferior function was able to thrive and your child function had the space to be received well. And for Greene, perhaps he was enabled to a large degree, maybe not, but at least his inferior function and his child function were taken care of. And then as he describes it, going into college and leaving college and going into the workforce, that he had this moment of rude awakening where he realized life is not as it seems. And he realized my naivety about power, I will not survive if I continue this, right? And he shares these stories about getting fired or basically being forced to quit from some of his superiors who were, by all appearances, jealous of him doing a good job, right? And he talked about this movement to becoming an observer instead of an active rat in the rat race or a cog in the machine. And he, on the backside of the pain that he dealt with, the tremendous burden of being powerless, right? Of feeling powerless. And no one is more sensitive to that than the INFP. He talked about the moment where he decided to become a watcher, an observer. And I mentioned in the article that all 4 NP types are these watchers, right? Or can become these watchers. And I talk about that also in the Jordan Peterson article, the Octagram one, which we did in December, that these NP types, I think when they start to get their act together, they choose to walk in their lives with a kind of distance, or at least in certain avenues of their lives, where they become watchful and attentive. And for Greene, this attentiveness became a tuning into the awareness of how power was used and how power was leveraged by others, by people aspiring to get more power, by people already at the top, and how they kept other power threats at bay. And this was the moment for him when he made this change to being an observer, that the beginning, the percolations, the sparks of the 48 laws of power started to form. And when I was talking to Chase about Robert Greene's type, going into the article, and this is when I started doing research for writing it, I thought Robert Greene was SDSF. I thought he was, using his research and his work to empower others through his living virtue of initiative. And I do think he uses his work to empower others, and that's part of the I think the treasure that the INFP can be. But for Greene, Chase said this sentence to me. He said of Greene, he did not write that book from a place of joy. And that book, of course, is referring to the 40 Laws of Power. And that sentence shook me, frankly, because it made me realize that Greene was SDUF. And Chase and I continued to have a conversation about that after he said that, and I was blown away at first of all how I didn't see that, because no one writes a book like this. No one deals with the struggles of severe powerlessness and the rejection and the dejection that any parent would feel as a result of being powerless. No one is going to go through that and write a book like this from the recounting the glory days of my youth. That's not what this book is about. That's not what his work is about. And in that talk at Yale that I mentioned, he talks about this concept called radical realism. And it's basically his principle that facing reality is, and accepting that reality is the first major step towards becoming a success in life, right? And to me, I have a lot of empathy for Robert Greene, because I think you can sense the deep pain in his life, and the deep pain that kind of soaks under his work. And it may not come out, it may not look like sensitivity or sadness in some of his books, because the 48 Laws of Power is definitely it can be a brutal book to read. It's very sharp. It's not going to make you feel good, right? But for Greene, I think this is in some ways a cry from his TI demon to say, this is the way it is, or this is the way other people use these rules, at least. And if you're not aware of them, you're going to be crushed. And I believe that he experienced a lot of that crushing. So that idea that he did not write the book from a place of joy confirmed for me that he was SDUF, right? Which means credulity and sloth. And I think it's important to comment on the SDUF type a couple different ways. The first way is the obvious of just talking about the deadly sin of sloth, because I think most of us still have this sort of gut reaction to the deadly sins as being inherently negative. But for Greene, as I talk about in the article too, that sloth is really about maintaining. And SDUF, credulity plus sloth, is really about maintaining the status quo, right? Maintaining your level of power, your level of influence. And Greene has talked about how really all he wants from life is just to keep doing good work and to share that work with others, and to kind of help others as a result of educating them. By his own account, he doesn't seem motivated by huge political aspirations towards being some corporate leader or something. That's often what the living virtue of those types, the INFP and the ESTJ of initiative, that's kind of what it is. It's often about leadership. It's often about taking charge, taking control for the sake of others, right? Or for the sake of an institution, or for the sake of your power, right? But he seems very set with just maintaining, right? And continuing his work in kind of this even keel way. But the other way you can verify SDUF is, you have the temple wheels, the credulity and the sloth, but you also have the four sides of the mind. And Robert Greene, frankly, has way too much TI demon to not be at least UD or UF, because his ability and his advocation to face reality, and kind of his admittance that there is a bitter pill there when looking at reality and accepting it. And I mean, if you can just imagine how hard it is for you or for I to use our demon function well and in an orderly way, I mean, it's even harder, in my opinion at least, for TI demon to be used well, because FI hero can be so pleasant and so comfortable, and the truth of reality is always going to chase you, right? But for him to even accept that and to preach that, and by all appearances to live by that, right? There's just too much TI demon to not be UD or UF, and that's why we believe that he's SDUF, leading with so much research. That's why he comes across like a high TI user at times, because that ESTJ subconscious, that TE aspirational function, is just so capable at research and casting a huge net, right? He's read, by his own account, thousands and thousands and thousands of books, right? I mean, most of us could only imagine what that would be like to have read half as much as he has. So that's why, in my opinion, the internet thinks he's an INTJ, because of the high extroverted thinking capacity, skill that he has, that really just comes from his TE aspirational and his ESTJ subconscious. But also that he's a teacher, and he puts himself in a position to be an educator and to help people, right? With the ENFJ shadow, which is what SDUF is all about. It's all about bringing in wisdom from the shadow to increase the maturity of the parent function and of the ego. So yeah, Robert Greene being SDUF was very surprising for me. And this leads to the other thing I wanted to mention about SDUF is really asking the question, what good is the SDUF archetype, right? Because octagram. Because we have the words associated to each octagram variant, hope, joy, despair, and decay. And decay is the SDUF. And I think most people's reaction is like, well, what good is decay? All the SDUF types are just spoiled and looking to get their childhood back. And in some way that can be true. But I think it's it's actually a blessing, in my opinion, that Robert Greene, that we believe he's an SDUF type, because it goes to show you that someone who is so impactful, and so impactful even here in this circle of the psychology, someone that Chase has talked about since day one, to have him as an example of what an SDUF type could be is profound. And it's something that I hope is encouraging to everyone, especially to SDUF types, to realize that yes, there is absolutely a bitter pill to swallow for being an SDUF type. I talked about that rude awakening moment, right? Where your SDSF finishes and you get hit by reality and life forces you into your UF pathway, right? But past that bitter pill, when you can get over that bitter pill and start to use the wisdom cultivated from your unconscious focus, I think there is a special kind of wisdom that SDUF types have. And the reason I think this is because it's for the same reason that Chase believes that Solomon, reportedly the wisest man who ever lived, was SDUF himself. And if you look at, if you think about decay as an archetype for the octagram variant, if you think about that and Solomon in relation to Ecclesiastes, I think you see some of the tremendous benefit of what decay can look like. I talked about this in the Ego Hack Your Fear course, I think in the ENTP lecture, which if you guys haven't checked it out yet, we really recommend it. It is, Chase has used the word life changing. I think it's the most complete, cohesive bit of content that we've put together for you guys ever. So if you're interested, you can visit offers.csjoseph.life/EYF, and we'll put a link in the description if you guys would like to check that out. But we highly recommend that for further exploration. But as far as Solomon and being SDUF and being decay, I think you can look at Ecclesiastes as this chapter by chapter kind of strategic breakdown of reality and looking for satisfaction in different places and decaying each strategy and saying, okay, that's only going to get me this far. That's not going to get me what I want. That's going to just leave me in despair, right? And what the decay is most good for, what the SDUF is most good for, is breaking things down, right? And I think specifically for Robert Greene, I believe that he chose to break down the delusions that he was probably fed as a child. That life, probably that if you just acted good, then life would treat you fairly, right? And his rude awakening to the corporate world was anything but that, right? So I think STUF types seek to decay the principles that brought about their enabling circumstances growing up, so that they can actually find wisdom there and never have to be saved from the truth of reality again. Because STUF types, of all the types, in my opinion, know that you can't run from the truth and you can't run from reality. All right. So for Robert Greene, he's SDUF. We believe he's ESTJ developed and ENFJ focused with definitely, that man has definitely seen his superego and has lived to tell the tale and has been taken the lessons from that to share with all of us, right, with his work. And as far as his work, I know my favorite of Robert Greene's works that I've read is Mastery, and I highly recommend that one. I think Chase's is the 50th Law, which I haven't read yet. I'm curious if you guys have read a couple of his works, what your favorite one is. I did really enjoy the 48 Laws of Power. It's definitely brutal to get through. It's long, and it definitely doesn't make you feel great necessarily. And if you want to check out more of his work, you can check out our reading list at csjoseph.life/reading. I believe we have 3 of his books there. We have the 48 Laws of Power, Mastery, and the 50th Law. And if you guys are interested in reading some of those, you can visit that link and purchase it through the affiliate link. It does help us out, but for your consideration if you're interested in any of those 3 titles. But as I said, I am curious what your guys' favorite Robert Greene books are. I plan to get to some of his other ones shortly, even though they're quite a marathon to get through. But yeah, as far as Robert Greene, there's one last thing I wanted to mention before we close here. I opened the article talking about the Bible verse. What is it? Matthew 10. What is it? Matthew 10:16, and it's the one where I think Jesus is talking about, I send you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as wise as serpents, but innocent as doves. And in the midst of Robert Greene's controversy and all the criticism that he's faced, that is the verse that keeps coming to mind as a way to interpret him, I think, charitably. And I think not just charitably, but fairly. Because, if you look at an interview by Robert Greene, if you listen to him talk, to me, he doesn't seem pleased with the reality that he has had to face. I think he has had to survive and had to learn to cope in some ways in the midst of, the TI demon's realization that life is not all fun and games, right? That life is not all FI hero delusions. It's just not. So for me, I look at him as someone who is trying to practice what he preaches and is trying to do his best to look at reality. Maybe that's, a bit favorable given his silver pair, so I maybe have a built-in respect for him, right? But I think keeping that verse in mind when you read Robert Greene, or when you read other people that basically let the facts speak for themselves without commenting on the moral quality of the facts, I think that's really important. And keeping that verse in mind, I send you out like sheep among wolves, so be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves, right? I think, in my opinion, that is the key to getting the most out of Robert Greene. So anyway, folks, thanks for checking in. Please let us know if you enjoyed this content, which is still kind of new and experimental, when we do an article on an individual person and then perhaps make a video about it. So let us know your feedback. We're open to any and all of it. Also, if you have any people that you would like us to type, whether it be an Octagram typing or historical typing or even a fictional typing, you can put your suggestions down below. I do have a list of people I'm working through, and that list is going to take priority. But I would love to have your considerations or have your suggestions. I think someone recommended Miyamoto Musashi the other day. I thought that was a great recommendation. He put that on the Robert Greene article, so I definitely added him to the list. But if you would like to see any of us to see us type anyone, please list it below. And with that being said, we'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for tuning in.